was eaten. Okay, we are recording. I think, Ryan, we're good to go live. Matt, we're good to open the house. And Matt and Blair, if you could turn your cameras off, we're good to go.
Blair, you're doing the Facebook Live? Okay.
Yeah, I will let you know once it's happening.
Great.
All right, hitting admit all.
Hello, hello.
And we're going live.
And we are live for friends watching on Facebook, friends near and far. Hello. People are filing in. Welcome, welcome. I see ArtsEmerson branding in audience backgrounds. Very exciting. All right. So people are going to continue to come in the next couple of minutes. Thank you all so much for joining us. We have a lot to cover in this hour, so I think I'm going to go ahead and start the introduction, and hopefully people will make it in time for the bulk of the conversation to start. So, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Kevin Becerra, and I am one of the associate producers here at ArtsEmerson in Boston, Massachusetts, on the unceded land of the Massachusetts and Wampanoag peoples. Before we begin, Adrian Wong of the Spiderweb Show in Ontario, Canada, has written this digital land acknowledgement, which I'd like to share. Since our activities are shared digitally through the internet, let's also take a moment to consider the legacy of colonization embedded within the technologies, structures, and ways of thinking we use every day. We are using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many Indigenous communities. Even the technologies that are central to much of the art we make leave significant carbon footprints, contributing to changing climates that disproportionately affect Indigenous peoples worldwide. I invite you to join me in acknowledging all of this, as well as our shared responsibility to make good of this time, for each of us to consider our roles in reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship. I also invite you to take a moment to acknowledge the peoples, the original caretakers and custodians of the land that you may be residing on if you are not in what's known as Boston, Massachusetts. And you can take that moment of reflection now. Thank you. All right, so we are here today because last week a bit of news was shared about David Dower, our artistic director, moving on from the organization, and David Howse continuing as our executive director and vice president of the Office of the Arts at Emerson College. You can imagine that that gives us a lot to talk about and kind of dig into. So I want to talk a little bit about what this conversation isn't going to be. It's not a season announcement. We realize and acknowledge that we didn't do one, that we usually do a big announcement of here's every project you can see and every artist you'll meet. And though this conversation has certain aspects, definite aspects of looking forward, we're not rooting that conversation in artistic programming today. And it's also not quite David Dower's tell-all moment of what lies ahead for him. There'll be lots of opportunities to learn more about where he's going, but we really want to take this moment to focus on what has been built here by David and David, how this transition has been imagined, and how we will find our way through it as an organization in the community of people that support this organization and that this organization supports. So as many of you are learning as you join, we are keeping videos off for the audience for this conversation, mainly to keep it kind of an intimate conversation between David and myself, and also to make it easier for people that are making use of Christina, the interpreter today, so that there's not a kind of mirage or a barrage of videos Instead, we can just focus on the speakers and the interpreters. So thank you so much for joining us in the call, but for having your video off. And then finally, if you have questions through the conversation, feel free to message them directly to Blair Noodleman, who you'll find in the chat. Blair's on our marketing team, and Blair will be sending those questions through to me, and I will be sending them through to David and David. How's that? A lot of ground rules, a lot of context setting. So we made it, we did it. Let's dive into the conversation. David and David, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Everything we do here at ArtsEmerson, we usually start with a question of the why. The why being why we're even gathered here. And that why is usually rooted in our values. A value that we've talked about a lot in past town halls, in our spaces, in our written language about the company is a value of stewardship of the spaces and the organization itself. And so I wonder if both of you could talk about how stewardship and the value of stewardship brings us to this transition and how it kind of impacts the approach to the transition.
Sure.
Why don't you start, David?
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. You know, this is the first moment in all of these where I really feel the limitation of the electronic media that we're in, because I would want nothing more than to give David Howse a hug to start this conversation. It's been a tremendous partnership. It will continue to be a tremendous friendship, and it's not over yet, folks. Stewardship. Yeah, I've never really understood the notion that the nonprofit sector of take any industry, but that the nonprofit sector, that jobs belong to the people in them. All my career has been in service. And I think David and I share that. And in that sense, I'm in this job as long as I'm the best steward for it. And when the moment arrives that it requires different skills or a different set of energy, or even a different approach to the future of the organization, it's my responsibility as a steward to make space for that stewardship to transition. And so it's not been a hard call for me, and we'll talk more about what were the elements, how did I come to know that this was the moment for myself, and then how did David and I come to know it together and build it together. You know, we're far removed from the moment I first had the question of, is it time for me to move? We're very far removed from that. And so there's been a period of time as stewards of the organization where we have worked very intentionally and very carefully to set the organization up for success in the transition to its future. So I guess that's my answer. These resources live in the public realm. We have a nonprofit status. That nonprofit status requires that we are here to deliver some kind of public benefit. This is not my personal benefit. It's not to benefit David Howse or Kevin Becerra or even any of you in the audience personally. It's a public benefit. So therefore we are stewards of that public trust.
Yeah, I think you say it so well, David. You call it stewards, caretakers, and I think, you know, I've always believed and thought that as organizations evolve, so too must leadership. And I go back to my time at the Boston Children's Chorus when I was running that organization, and I was entrusted with a mission and a vision, and I was carrying a baton, you know, almost as a bit of a race when you run these organizations. It's a journey. And I was carrying that baton for a long time and felt really good about what I accomplished while I was holding it, but understood that as the organization, this is the Boston Children's Chorus I'm speaking of, as it became a different organization at a different time, different kind of leadership was needed. And it was incumbent upon me to see myself as not, as David says, an owner of that vision, mission, but literally just a caretaker, biding my time, spending the time that I had in front of me to sort of take care of that. And I think the same thing is true here at ArtsEmerson. David and I both have been on this journey together with an amazing team, an amazing group of patrons and audience members. We've been holding that baton. You can picture us running with this holding baton in our hands. And the fact that one shifts doesn't change the dynamic and the vision or the mission, but it really is just an evolution. And what's most exciting about any transition, in addition to the challenge of change, is the opportunity for something that comes new. Every ending is a new beginning, and sort of being stewards in the sense that we are on a journey towards something much larger than ourselves, and to know when the time comes for being able to get out of one's own way, to sort of make space and to allow the seed that's been planted to really grow. And I feel this is a moment for us, and that, you know, we're called to and feel really good about.
Yeah, you know, I always have had this sense that when an institution mistakes itself for the point, and that preserving the institution is the only job of the institution. Similarly, when the person in the role mistakes themselves for the point, we start to lose the purpose. And so we have been, ArtsEmerson, Kevin was reminding us this earlier, you know, we've been through several transitions here. And what has remained true and what will remain true is what we're committed to building, and what we are, the thing that we're committed to making for and in the world, the public benefit we're determined to deliver. And, you know, I came in, when I came in with a set of questions about what was going to be possible. And actually, some of you don't know this, but, you know, David Howse and I started talking about what is actually possible for an arts institution to achieve in the realm of civic transformation and changing the narrative of a city and changing the way a city collaborates and connects across difference. And David and I were pursuing it in separate institutions initially in 2013, but those conversations kept going and going, and they were shaping both us and the institutions, and eventually the opportunity came for us to do it in the same institution. But that thing that we have been building is still the thing that will remain. And it will remain, the purpose and the mission, vision, and values will remain even when it's time for David to move on. So I just want to say to people with all confidence that ArtsEmerson is here, and it's the point, and it will continue, and it's in good hands. And it became incumbent upon me to figure out what my next step was going to be in order to make the space for ArtsEmerson to be the thing that it's been becoming all this time.
Yeah, I want to kind of talk a little bit about these resources that are not ours, they're a public good, and the nonprofit is built to serve a public good. And one of the ways that you all expanded the good that these resources can do is to move in a shared leadership model, right? So by working together in a very kind of conscious and intentional way, you've been able to have a greater impact in the city so far, and as we continue. So I imagine that makes this process very different. You know, David said that, David Dower, you said that when we've come a long way since you first started questioning whether or not it was time to leave. And this may be news for many people on the call, but we're about a year away from the time when this conversation started, a year in the past. So that's a lot of time. And I know that myself, and I'm sure lots of people on the call would like to know more about what that process has been like, because I think, you know, in a traditional organization, a company, a corporation, there's the leader, and the leader steps down, and there's a succession plan, and it's an associate, or there's some kind of model that's around the kind of point of the pyramid stepping down. But that's not what's happening here, right? We're talking about transition within a shared leadership model. And so I wonder, how does the, well, I'll get to that. Can you talk to us about those early conversations? David Dower, we'll start with you. How did you get to the point of being able to say, I think it may be time?
Well, it wasn't so much that it was time as that I was spotting the time was coming. And I've said it, you've seen it in the articles, but it's still true for me. I am in my bones, I'm a director, and I have made many, many, many plays, and I see the world. I enter and I sort of animate myself as a maker of things. And one of the things that's true about a director is that once the play opens, you go and join the audience. In fact, in the theater, sort of insider information a lot of you probably don't have, but in an equity production, in a professional production, the director has to leave on opening night and then can only give notes through the stage manager from then on. You're not even supposed to go into the dressing rooms. And that is for a particular purpose. Once the play has arrived, it's time for that vision to be allowed to set and soar. And a director is a maker of things and tinkers and tinkers and tinkers and tinkers. And I say this, and I know there's somebody on the call who can vouch for me on this. I did that with the Z Space in San Francisco. I stayed beyond the moment when we opened. And I tinkered and tinkered, and we almost broke it. And it only still exists because Lisa Steindler, who is on this call, was able to hold it together and bring it back from my having stretched it out of shape. And so thank you, Lisa, for that bit of grace. But I was determined not to do that again. And so I was already listening for the moment when it felt like, oh, have we opened? And it came, and it was loud. And it came in three specific instances. One, we had a training, a People's Institute for Survival and Beyond training with the whole staff. And in that training, as we were doing our going around, I was watching and I was looking at the room, and the room had a certain amount of diversity that I was really proud of. And I was listening, and it wasn't my work, it was our work, the whole staff, but led by David Howse. And I was very proud of the accomplishment until I heard the titles. And I realized that most of the people of color working at the organization were working at grade levels that were they were jobs that were term limited. They could only be here for 2 years and then they had to move on, or they were at the lower grade levels. And much of the power in the organization hadn't been diversified. And we had the benefit of having David Howse as our executive director and co-leader. And it kind of felt, I didn't notice it. He wasn't in the training. I didn't notice that until that training started, and it became clear in the go-around. And I realized, oh, there's more work to be done here, but there's no space. How do we fix this? Then we had a staff retreat a few months later, and the staff was asking, well, how do we grow here? What's our advancement opportunity? And out of my mouth was coming, well, sorry, we're a small organization, we're a thin organization, there aren't actually advancement opportunities, so maybe you're gonna have to leave in order to grow. And that haunted me. And then we got to the World Alive event in that fall. And the room looked exactly like the city of Boston that we had imagined, like a room that we had imagined all along. The artists that were there to celebrate with us and the artists who were on the season, everything about it looked like an opening night. It looked 100% like what we had imagined, what I had imagined coming in and what David and I had imagined together. And that's when I knew that it had opened, and my new job was to find the best path to making space for the next thing, the next set of skills to arrive. And so we spent a long time doing it. You don't do that precipitously, otherwise you break a thing. So that's why we spent a year making ready the institution for this transition.
So David Howse, your colleague, brings this proposal to you that he's looking at the path forward, and what was your process? What was your individual process in kind of hearing it and responding to it?
Yeah, I guess I wasn't wholly surprised because David and I have talked about the state of the world, the state of the theater, the lack of mobility inside our organization, inside others. And so I wasn't wholly surprised, but I can't say that I was excited because again, we were just, it had been for some plus years at that point where we're actually in the roles, and really things began to pick up. And so I kind of was I didn't believe him at one point, you know, and then I realized, okay, yeah, he's serious, and we have to start talking about what this means. But your question around how is it different from transitioning a singular leader and to a sort of a co-leadership? Because after David shared with me his sense of where he thought he needed to sort of move, I then had to think, and we had to think together. So what does that actually mean? You know, we have done this together. Is this something that I want to keep moving forward? You know, is it my time to actually transition from the organization? At that moment, you know, like many leaders, we get calls from different places. And I thought for a little bit around sort of, you know, do I do this, you know, as a singular leader, or do I find another place? And, you know, after thinking about other opportunities and, you know, just kind of sort of seeing what's out in the world, realizing that, no, this is the place I want to be, simply because David's moving to something different. I think there's more work for me. There's more that we can do together. And I made a conscious choice to stay here in this organization to continue the work that we've started, you know, and the work that will continue with, again, our team. And so that was different because, you know, had I said, oh, wait, well, I'm leaving as well, that probably would have shifted maybe David's thinking. And so we were literally sort of negotiating, like, what happens if you make this move? What do I do? And we did that all very openly and very transparently. We had a lot of, as we always do, you've heard us talk about the beauty and the complication of shared leadership. And we were as vulnerable and honest with each other around what that meant. And finally, you know, sort of landed on the place that, you know, this is how it's supposed to happen. You know, at the time, David didn't actually have a plan of it to be back with family. And so we thought, let's move forward in this way. And we had already begun to put in place structures inside the organization that spoke to the values and the ideals of shared leadership. And I just remind everyone on the call, you know, we paint a really beautiful picture of the shared leadership, but
No,
surprise, yeah, right, exactly. This is all a performance. The truth is, and some of you know it, but we actually structurally are not equal in position. But so for me, it's always shared leadership is not a structure or an infrastructure issue, it's a mindset. And so several years ago, before David said, you know, here's what I'm doing, we start to put in place a shared leadership model throughout the organization. And we talk a lot about amplifying the expertise and not the hierarchy. And so in many ways, when people say, well, you're going back to singular leadership, we're actually in a structural situation right now that speaks to that, but we've been able to live out our shared ideals in a very open and transparent way, in ways that we hope is that inspire and invite more collaboration. So all that to say, it's a much more complicated process, not just this person leave, this one slots in. And I think the other piece that is that we'll probably talk about is, like, you know, when David speaks about making space, like, for whom are you making space? What does that actually mean in a co-leadership? You know, so I think there's a lot that we had to navigate and keep quiet, you know, for a very long time. Our hope was to make this announcement back in March. Yeah. That was the plan. And we'd have all kinds of time.
Being here through January. We wanted everybody to have that much time. Yeah.
Right. And, you know, the world turned around in late February, early March. And then it takes time to pull these things together. And so the time that we have is the time that we have. And so we're making the best of it, and very grateful for our team who's sort of lived through this transition, not knowing that they were living through this transition for a year, but then sort of kind of navigating, like, this feels weird, but okay, here we go. David Howse is on this call again? Why is that? You know, so it has been a bit of a little bit more of a challenge than just one person leaves and someone else slots in, because we both had to think about our future separately and also the collective future for the organization.
Yeah, one of the things that we did, again, for people who aren't staff on this call, this has been David's plan all along, was this shared leadership model that would be distributed throughout the organization. And so we started with the leadership, and then we moved to a senior management team and built a senior management team that works in the shared leadership function as well. And then we moved to departmental level and built a cross-departmental communications team that works in a shared leadership format as well. And so we built the skills of shared leadership into the organization. And then also in that process, we were preparing those different teams to be able to lead. And that's part of what we've done in order for me to be able to leave. And it's also what makes it possible for me, and what makes it so clear that it is that moment, because these teams are functioning, these teams are ready, so we prepared the way, and now it's time for me to make the space. And to this point, really important, anybody who's trying to figure out what this means for any other organization, if it means anything at all, this is not a moment of me making space for anyone in particular even. This is about leave the space and see what comes. As long as I'm sitting in the space, we can't get to the next thing. We don't know what would come. And this is actually something that comes up in the HowlRound world all the time, in the theater commons that we manage in the Office of the Arts. Vijay Matthews talked a lot about it over the years, that it's revelatory. When you actually make space, it's revelatory what shows up. If you don't make the space, you will never know what was waiting to come in. And so that's what we mean by me making space here. This isn't about making, let's make space for David to be a leader. David's been a leader all these years. It's not even about, let's make space so we can hire another leader of color. We don't know who's coming next, but we are making the space to see specifically. And that will be the next level up in terms of the mission, vision, and values and its impact for ArtsEmerson.
2020 is the year of change, and and David Howse, you talked a little bit about kind of how much has shifted to think that this was going to be announced in March originally, and to think how many times we've grappled with a need for change, or kind of forceful change, forced upon us change, since that time, since early 2020. How has your approach to stewarding this transition process shifted over that year, as you've been kind of instilling these circles of shared leadership throughout the organization, and kind of preparing everyone for this shift to happen? What have you learned, or what shifts have you had to make in the planning process?
Well, it's the whole process has been a learning process, and that's what I'm so proud about our organization. We're constantly on a continuum of learning. So the best laid plan, we had a great plan, and it was, we were feeling good about it, and it had to adjust. And I think the time that we've had to sort of live out that longer period of quiet is a gift, because again, it allowed more time to strengthen, to sort of engage the team. I will say that, it gave me a clearer focus on where our strengths were as a team, as an organization, where my own personal strengths were, and where my areas of opportunities are, and also where places where we could shore up. And so essentially, we tried to build a foundation that predates even the notion of transition, that actually can carry us through even these challenging times. And so I would say that it just made it more challenging for us, because we were so we talk about transparency all the time, telling the truth and being open and honest. And we were in a situation where we just couldn't tell the truth. And it would have been so much easier had people understand this is what's happening, and this is why you're experiencing. The lack of communication at times that you're experiencing is a real thing. And guess what? I can't tell you why. And so for me, it actually, that sense of being patient and having this deep sense of urgency, the two were just in constant conflict in that sort of March to now period. And the opportunity to actually sort of release the information, as hard as it is to sort of deliver that information, was such a breath of fresh air, such an exhale moment, because we could help people come into, which is our nature, to be collaborative, to say, help us with this process. Transition for any organization is challenging. And when you can't be transparent at the point of the transition, it makes it even more complicated. So, like I said, I think the team is ready really for so much of what we throw at them. And there's a lot that comes at the team, just like we throw a lot at the audience. But their sense of curiosity and their sense of trust in a process allows us to navigate. And again, it won't be easy. We haven't come through the transition, but the way that we've entered it gives me great hope for the way that we will come through and navigate.
Yeah, because all that time where we weren't able to tell people what was going on, that was also the time we had to get it set up. So it wasn't like we could wait until we could tell everybody and then we could get it set up at that point. So we had to keep moving through the plan, just weren't able to say it out loud. And that was very uncomfortable for everybody, including David and myself.
David Howse, I'm glad you mentioned the audience. So, we are larger than just our staff. We're larger than the staff, even in the community of Emerson College and the Emerson students. We are an international group of artists, and we're a really dedicated group of audience members and neighbors and friends and collaborators from all over the city and beyond. And so I know it's been a short time since the announcement was made official, but I wonder, how have you seen the kind of stewardship and the kind of collective energy that we've been building for so many years at this point? How are you seeing it manifest through conversations with artists and with audiences?
That's for you, David Howse.
Oh, that was for me.
It could be for either.
Okay, great. I'll have to say that not surprising, but certainly reassuring. Every conversation we've had with patrons, with audience members, what comes back to us is nothing but love and gratitude and generosity. At a point when so many people during these transitions choose to say, okay, thank you for letting me know, we're going to wait and see what happens before we continue to engage. Everyone very quickly says, we see you, we see what's happening, we're saddened by it deeply, but we're so excited about what's coming next. And that sense of commitment, is not a commitment necessarily to myself or a commitment to David, even though there are people who are deeply committed to both of us and in each of us individually. That's a commitment to what we're trying to achieve here through ArtsEmerson. And so that's been incredibly gratifying to hear people hear and tell us our story and talk to us about what this has meant for them, what they think it means for the city, and what it has meant for, in their opinion, the field. And so I think a little bit, I thought a lot about like why this sort of swell of generosity and deep sense of understanding, of what's happening in this moment. And it occurred to me that for so long under David's sort of artistic leadership, we've really demanded that the audience be curious. We've thrown so many different kinds of projects and so many kinds of forms, and the audience, our patrons, our staff, sometimes when they don't understand, they trust the process and they trust where we're trying to go. And I think that same sense of generosity has been afforded to us so far as we've talked through this transition. And so that sense of generosity, that sense of wonder, we don't know exactly what's going to happen in this next iteration of leadership, but we're curious about it and we're going to stick with it. And for me, that certainly knowing that people are leaning in and not leaning away during this very critical moment for any organization when you have leadership transition is inspiring and humbling at the same time. And so, there may be people who are not so happy, they're just not talking to us about it yet. So we haven't heard from them. But including from our staff, while there's some sadness and lots of questions around what does this actually mean, there is a sense of yes, and we will continue together. And that's, I couldn't ask for a better response. And I know that David certainly feels the same way. I speak for him, by the way, half the time. Okay, you can speak now.
Well, that was my answer. So now I'll tell your answer. No, it's true. And it's the evidence of what I'm saying that we've opened. It's not about me. It's not about David. It's not even about the two of us together. The way that people have been able to speak back to us, and Anne, I think you're on this call. We just got a beautiful email from Anne today that John, just like one of us wrote it. Our audience knows us as well as we know each other. And that's a mark of an ensemble that's ready to take flight. And it's really, it's generous in the sense that it allows me to know this is the right moment. And it also is confidence building for everyone who's staying to see. I mean, we've had, we have one multi-year funder who knew this was coming and added more money to the grant unsolicited. We have another one who's extending the program that we're in another period of years, just to signal, no, we're here for the long haul. This organization is here for the long haul. We have donors who are doing the same. So we have evidence that the organization is much bigger than the two of us, or even just bigger than our staff. And that is the evidence of an organization that has opened and is here, and it's ready to fly.
Continuing on the same kind of theme, there's a question from Ruth about a question around, does ArtsEmerson have a board? And if not, ArtsEmerson specific board, what is the college's leadership? What has their role and influence been in this transition?
It's a good question. So no, ArtsEmerson per se does not have a board. We say that we are accountable to the people. So there are a lot of folks who have been deeply involved, Ruth included, in various iterations. But I would say for the college's leadership, including, Lee Pelton, our president, who speaks very highly of, the leadership, the co-leadership model, but more importantly, ArtsEmerson and what it means for the college. And it was important because this is such, it's such an important position and such an important transition. The trustees were involved in sort of understanding sort of what's the why, and then sort of what are we thinking going forward. And again, incredible support. I don't know all the trustees because David has worked more closely with them, but we recently, 3 weeks ago, had a call with him, and it was nothing short of a love fest. And I was like, well, I wasn't expecting this in both areas of thanking David, but being very grateful and for what we've accomplished, and also very excited about my role. So there's a consistency there. And even though the trustees are not all here in Boston, they also really appreciate the work that's happening in the Office of the Arts. And when we speak about ArtsEmerson, it's also important for us to say that David and I have multiple roles, and one of those roles that also includes overseeing the Office of the Arts, which expands beyond just the ArtsEmerson team. And so there has been involvement from both Lee. Lee's been very active with us in this, in navigating through the transition, but incredible support, and certainly from the trustees as well. What would you add there, David?
Oh, no, you nailed that. Just that it's probably a different Ruth.
Oh.
That's okay. Thank you, Ruth, for the question. And surprise, you didn't know you were so influential.
This is what happens when you can't see anybody.
I know.
It takes everyone, everyone, we consider everyone audience.
Yes.
So I wonder, I said that I would save this conversation for this question for a future conversation, but I am curious, so I'm going to ask it. David Dower, you can supply the real quote, but there's a kind of line of thinking that that David Dower, you taught to me, that came from Zelda Chandler, founding artistic director of Arena Stage, and kind of founding kind of rabbinical energy of
founder. She was the one who wrote the language that created the nonprofit status for the American theater. So yeah, Zelda
frames coming to work every day seeking answers to a set of questions. And so, David, if you could give the quote, yeah. David Dower, but I also am just curious about what are the questions that are leading you both through this process moving forward now. So we're at a beginning. I mean, the thing about an announcement is then there's the thing to happen. So we're at another beginning, and I wonder, what are the questions leading you to forward?
Well, first, the story. Sorry, you all are so familiar with me and my stories, but when I got to Arena Stage, I had left Z-Space, which I had founded and ran for better part of 13 years. And I was really conflicted as to whether or not I'd done the right thing by leaving, and I hadn't left it in great shape. I was trying to figure out what was my responsibility. And I talked to Zelda, and she had left Arena after 40 years and became the Dean of Students, Dean of the Performing Arts at NYU. And so I asked Zelda what had given her the indication that it was time for her to leave. She'd been there for 40 years. Why did she leave? And she said, an institution is a container for your inquiry. And the morning that you wake up and the questions that you have can no longer be answered at the institution that you work at, it's time for you to move on. And my question coming here was whether or not such a thing could exist, that we could, one, create from a brand new arts organization with no legacy, could we actually create a cultural institution in the city, and a city, any city, but here in Boston in particular, an anchor cultural institution that actually aimed at the transformation of a civic narrative, that aimed at connection across difference, and aimed at advancing equity and dealing with the history of race in the city. Was it possible to build an institution of scale that had those goals? Because it felt to me like it mattered. I wanted my life's work to lead toward those outcomes, and I was working in the theater, and I needed to know, could I make that happen? Can that happen? And that's how David and I met. I'm asking those questions at a meeting. David's asking those questions at a meeting. And we were enrolled in, our organizations were in the same grant program. And I'm saying that, and he's saying that. And we, sort of landed on the sidewalk together after one meeting, just like, who are you and why are you saying those things? And maybe we should be working more closely together. So that all comes from that set of questions. This whole relationship came out of me saying out loud my questions at the time. My question now became, when I saw that room and when I saw the staff so ready, and also when I saw that David had other opportunities, but that he wasn't going to get to fully live this set of questions for himself here, unless there was space for him as well to expand into his own questions. I saw all of those things, and my next question was, what happens if I make space? And this becomes, I was wondering when I was going to have to say this, but I'm going to say it now. We said this back in the statements conversation, that ArtsEmerson, we did not need George Floyd to be murdered to commit ourselves to the fact that Black Lives Matter. We did not need that. We already knew that Black Lives Matter. We already knew that the institution had a responsibility. Similarly, we did not need the We See You White American Theater to know there was a problem in the American theater about space and leadership and power and how it's shared and not shared. I knew that. I worked for decades around that same question. And so then this moment became, oh, well, what does happen if I step off and make the space? And it took a year for me to do it, simply so that the organization would be ready. And, we felt ready. But now we'll see. And I don't know. And I'm going on to a different set of questions in a different context that are equally compelling to me. But my question that led to this was, well, what will happen if I step out without a net? What happens? Because that's what it needs. We need to share this power. We cannot. We white leaders of the American theater cannot cling to these jobs like they're our personal property. We cannot make the boards and the staff and the audience carry us out in a coffin. We have a responsibility to the transition of this field. And so if we have that responsibility, what happens if I meet it? And that was the question that led me to say to David, I think I have to tell you, I think it's time for me to go. And that's like 18 months ago, whatever it was.
You want me to answer that question?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my questions are different. You've just heard the questions of someone who has really made a decision about making space. And for me, the decisions and the questions that I'm asking are continuation in many forms, but the questions have taken on different shape. I mean, so the top, what comes to mind, I'm really curious about how you keep culture intact in this new distance environment. That's actually been really something I think a lot about, because we've worked so hard as a team to build a culture, to establish a culture that allows the work that you see public to happen, and to happen with some level of authenticity. I'm also curious about the post-pandemic realization of who we will be. What does it take for an arts organization that's committed to cross-cultural engagement and connection? How do you create that in this space, and how do you marry what we knew as live theater with this new virtual space. How do you do those two things? We were just on a call earlier around the future of international programming. So those questions that are surfacing around, you know, how we walk more lightly on the climate as it relates to moving work throughout the world, all those are questions that have been there but have taken on a different level of urgency and momentum and direction. And then there's still the question, because while we've done, I can say humbly, I feel like we've done really good work as we work to build an audience that we mean, but there's more work to be done there. And so that is something that keeps me up, not keeps me up, but it wakes me up every day. How do we keep making sure that everyone who wants to experience beauty and creativity and excellence and rigor and provocation and joy and other cultures, how do we create space and make space and claim space for everyone in a way that leads us to a place where we're all celebrating our common humanity? And for me, that is the work of ArtsEmerson. It's been my own personal work, and it's the work that continues to come up for me and work. The questions that surface, that come out of that piece are what drive me. And I hope will drive me for a long time. I hope we get to the solution and to the answer, but until we do, I'll keep waking up and trying to solve that problem with a bunch of people who are in it with me. And I think for me, that's sort of those are just some of the questions, because you told me you were going to ask this question, Kevin. Thank you. So I hadn't really thought about it, but that's what you get.
No, but it's beautiful. I mean, you hear it right there, the truth of what Zelda was even talking about. My questions live outside the institution. Yours live inside the institution. And that is, that's as it should be. And that's the proof that the right thing is happening, and the future is brighter than even what we've been through. So that I find take great freedom in those questions. I love that you have them, and I know you're going to answer them.
We will answer them with everybody. It's going to take all of us, right, to actually get, as it has. I mean, I always say that David and the Davids get a lot of press, a lot of credibility, but there is an army of people, and not all behind the scenes, you know, but they're an army of people who are, you know, making the work happen. We just get to be the faces, oftentimes, of that. So it'll take all of us to continue that work, and it's important work.
I think there's something, it's not quite a formulated thought or question, but there's something kind of in between what you're all saying right now that's reminding me a lot about how listening is so important to our process. How, you know, not only are we moving from a place of questions that we're seeking, but also as we seek those questions, we do a lot of listening to those around us. That's why we've had, I think this is like our 6th or 7th town hall, not counting the town halls that have included artists and been centered around those questions. And so I think I just kind of underline your point, David Howse, to the people watching, that kind of the forward motion and the continued seeking of David's questions, the institution's questions, your questions, it all happens together, and it happens when we gather, whether it be digitally or in person or whatever we can do, to really hear each other. You know, I think about something like We See You White American Theater. We didn't need it to start our anti-racism conversations. We didn't need it to start probing into anti-Blackness in our organization. But it was an opportunity for a lot of people on a big scale to listen, you know, and it was, I can only imagine that there's, you know, influence in these larger cultural moments that happen, and we think, oh, well, we're in the middle of this work, and okay, that's it, you know, we pivot and we shift and we expand. There are some lovely comments that I'm being passed along. One is that there's a question about, will there be a book published by the two of you about shared leadership, which makes me question a little bit about the kind of documentation, something that the HowlRound world, our sister organization, talks about all the time. These conversations may be a part of that, but have you considered kind of a documentation and dissemination of the work that you've done together?
Yeah, I'm kind of laughing here because, you know, we've talked about documenting for the last 6 years. But just on a call the other day, as we were talking about what shared leadership and how we've lived it and sort of the lessons we've learned in it, both, you know, the good and the bad. And I said, maybe that's our next work together, because again, you know, David's going to Seven Fingers, which is a company that we love and we'll have to negotiate together. And so there'll be that kind of connection. But we sort of jokingly said, maybe we do need to write a book about what that means. And again, you know, you want to write a book, not just say, listen to me, how great I am, but it's about what we're learning. And if that's something that we feel the universe might benefit from, then hey, maybe so. In our spare time, we might just whip out a book. But who knows? There's no commitment there.
And there's a question about kind of an assessment of what your work together has done to kind of shift the conversation in the arts in Boston. It's a really big question. So thank you, Lisa, for asking it. Local Lisa, who's been coming to shows in Boston for 40 years and has felt a shift. So I wonder, do you kind of see a shift in from, when was your first year here, David Howse? 2014, 15?
2015.
15? It's been a long time. How have you noticed that shift in your work together and the kind of closer community to us?
Yeah, David, you've been here in Boston for 20 plus years, so
I think, you know, I'll say it this way. I think there has been a shift toward the good, you know, generally speaking, a bit of a quiet movement. And I'm honored to have been part of that movement and been, in some cases, provocateur in that movement, and happy to be a part of organizations who've been respected enough where people will listen and watch and pay attention to what we're doing. Not to say that we're getting all right, but we've always been committed to sharing what we're learning, the good and the bad. It's not about, look at us, we're leaders, we're wagging our tail. It's like we are really struggling with these questions and are willing, given the resources and our orientation, to go beyond our safety net, to try some things. And if that's has been helpful to the community, if that's been helpful to our colleagues, both close and far, then that's wonderful. But to say that, you know, we're leading in that effort, I would say that we all have some influential elements to it. But I do think the city of Boston and the way that we're looking at work, the way that we're privileging subordinated voices has shifted, certainly in the programmatic space. Slower on the sort of organizational leadership space, both of the board and the senior levels. So I do think there's progress, but we're just scratching the surface. And I think the moment that we're in, the post pandemic, and this moment of racial reckoning, this moment of really getting a sense of our impact on the climate, you know, more than, you know, in this moment with all the fires raging, et cetera, I think it's gotten people's attention a little bit more. And that for me is a gift, and I hope that we learn from that and continue to move in that direction. But I do sense there's been a shift for the positive, and I just think we've leaned a little bit, and now we need to go more fully into that space.
Yeah, you know, it's really hard for me, just like David, it's hard for me to quantify it, and we haven't measured it. I think it's for someone else to do. Ours is just to do the work in a way. But I do remember, and many people on the staff will remember this as well, there was a huge change, both in the numbers of people who were coming and who was coming immediately after the election in 2016. And up to that point, we had gotten a lot of resistance around the region for the way we were talking and the way we were programming. And there was a lot of sense that that's not art's job, and that somehow means you're not programming from a place of excellence. There was a lot of concern about what we were doing. But once the election happened, there was a complete turn where audiences were coming in and saying, essentially saying, I didn't see that coming and I wanted to be here so that I can figure out what I didn't know. And similar change has happened now in the last few months in terms of people trying to figure out why, not necessarily just audience members, you know, organizations and colleagues, trying to figure out why they didn't see this coming, this, particularly the racial reckoning or the outpouring of grief and rage and just the sort of mask ripped off of the violence of the inequalities. Why didn't we know that? And so they're coming, putting it into their own work, but they're coming at us for how can we help. And so I see some evidence like that of impact that has been encouraging and has kept us going. But it's hard to know what came, what thing influenced what thing. There are a lot of people that work on it here in this community, and our staff lives in this community and is at work on it in your own lives. So who knows? But I'm glad that it's happening, and I don't think it's ours to claim.
We have a couple minutes left, and I feel like I want to end with this question of what can we look forward to, or what is the future of your relationship? What do the next, whether it be over the next few months or the next, who knows? What can we look forward to in the David's collaboration now that we've announced this transition?
The World Alive event, I hope you all will come on October 8th. That'll be our celebration of having launched this thing, opened this play, and we're going to celebrate ourselves. We don't do it that often, but we are going to celebrate ourselves on October 8th, so come do that with us for sure. What else, David?
I would just say that, I continue to say that David is here until January and has committed to partnering with me in the organization, even through the transition until it's really set. So there's, we've got all the programming that you'll be hearing about shortly. What I have said, and I'll continue to say, is I'm losing a day-to-day colleague, but not a friend. And so I know that we don't know, that's it's an ending of this iteration of sort of our partnership. That's an ending, but it's also a new beginning, and we don't actually know what comes next. And I think that's the exciting part. But what I will say is that this ride for the last 5.5+ years has been extraordinary. And, I think we say it of each other that couldn't ask for a better partner in this important work. And I think the relationship that we have is one that doesn't go away easily. It just gets richer. And so I'm looking forward to that, to the benefit of myself, but also the benefit of whatever comes out of that collective friendship.
My internet is crashing here a little bit, but I'm going to tell one goofy story that David's probably going to be mad at me about later.
If I'm going to be mad, don't tell me.
I think he will be, but you'll get over it. Some time ago, I was so grateful for David and his capacity to articulate things in meetings and hold a line in meetings and to provide direction for work that I was just not articulate about. From the very beginning of our friendship, and then especially when we started working together. And so I got into this habit whenever he would do something that was just really right on point that I couldn't have done myself and I really needed him to do at that moment. I would just always text him, "Have I told you lately, ... and sort of put the song in his head. And I did that for, I don't know, more than a year. And he texted me back, "Yeah, but you never actually say it. Like I never finished the sentence." So then I texted it back and I said, "Have I told you lately that I love you?" And then I started to be like so committed to that. And it meant so much to me to say it. And I mean, it started as this hokey little lyric. But so, those texts are going to keep coming. And every time I have this thought of, oh, he's too far away, I haven't said something, or I haven't heard from him, or I don't know how he's feeling, I just do that little text. And then sometimes, and you'll admit, there are sometimes when you've gotten that, when you felt, thank you for sending that, like it hasn't been.
Oh yeah. And there are times when I was working really, really hard, and I'd be like, "You have not told me lately." I'm working hard over here.
So that's our theme song, and we're gonna play it over and over and over.
We should play it at the World Alive.
Yes, we can sing it. Let's sing it at World Alive.
Rehearsals.
Wow. Versus David Howse and David Dower, and it's just that song, and it's 3 hours.
just that line over and over again. Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for your candor and for this conversation. Thank you to everyone who has been watching, either in the Zoom room or on Facebook, who has been watching the archived conversation on YouTube. Truly, thank you. Thank you to Christina and TrueBiz for your interpretation today. This isn't the last we'll hear from us talking about this, I'm sure. We'll continue to work at dissemination to share the learning so that others can build on it and share what you're learning. So thank you all very much and have a great evening.
Bye, everybody.
Bye for now.